Hello, my name is Frank Baffo, and today I'll be talking to you about open source. So what's on the agenda for this presentation? First I will talk about what open source is, its license, essence of its license, possible benefits, open source going beyond software, Linux, the open source initiative, and other notable projects. So getting started with here, what is open source? Essentially, it's software for which the original source code is made freely available and may be redistributed and modified by anyone. Essentially, it's just software that people can collectively write and share and use for any project that they want. This license for this concept or idea was made available by the general public license of version 2, which was made by Richard Stallman in February 1989. Essentially, it guarantees end users the freedom to run, study, share, and modify this software, which has been made publicly available. It almost works essentially as a reverse copyright, in which it grants others the rights to repurpose and redistribute your work at will under the explicit terms of the license. So essentially, people are protected for using and sharing this software. More about this license. There are a few rules that the Open Source Initiative, which I'll talk about later, has ruled for how this license should be used by users of open source software. First, there must be free redistribution, so that means you must be allowed to share your software with anyone, and anyone can share your software. The source code must be provided or can easily be found somewhere. Derived works, so this means that people who modify your software and purpose it for their own must be allowed. That is totally legal and totally free for anyone to do. The author's source code must have integrity. So this means people must be upfront about who they are, what source code they explicitly use, its purpose, and label their work and source code accurately for others who may wish to use it or study it. Continuing on, the license promotes no discrimination against persons or groups, so that means people who openly source out their projects and softwares must make that available to anyone wishing to use it. It can't just be used for specific parties. Going along with that, there must be no discrimination against fields of endeavor. So that means people must be allowed to use the program or the software in whatever manner they want, and people must be allowed to provide that for others despite what their intentions may be with this software. Also, the distribution of the license must be made by those creating the software. So this just means that it must be compatible along lines of distribution and can't just be hidden. With these last couple points of these license, the license must not be specific to a product. So that means open source software cannot be made simply for one product, such as an Apple phone or just a specific computer or any type of device really, where it can't be utilized on other products and other platforms. Going along with this, it must also not restrict other softwares. So this means that softwares written in open source cannot be made to intentionally harm or otherwise disrupt other programs and softwares from doing their job. And lastly, wrapping it up, it must be technology neutral. So this means that like I said before, it's not specific to any product, and it is not made in a way that other people cannot use it. So moving on, some possible benefits that are brought about through open sourcing software is, especially for business sides, it is very low cost to start up. Because this source code is essentially free and written by anyone, it does not have to be bought by the company that is trying to use it. So for example, Apple hires programmers to create their own softwares and makes it exclusively Apple's, in which they have to pay people continuously to continually write these programs. Open source, there's essentially no one to pay. The software is free. And this also allows for safety and reassurance in that patches for potential problems are almost fixed instantaneously by people around the world who have the program and have the talent enough to fix the problems that are being brought up. Open source also is value driven, so it's made for the sole purpose of everyone being able to use it. It is all inclusive, no one is excluded, and this allows for the freedom and flexibility for not only for businesses to continuously modify what softwares they use, but especially for creators and software writers. This allows them the freedom to demonstrate and put their skills at a forefront and on a stage at which they may not have been looked at. So for example, someone who is a good coder may be able to write a patch for a said problem in this open source software. Other people may notice that and realize that he has fixed this problem, and this may lead to this person, say, getting offers for positions at companies that may not have otherwise known about him. In terms of open source extending beyond software, the concept of open source really can apply to a whole bunch of different things outside of explicitly processing software. So one of those things that is huge nowadays is open hardware, which essentially is easy to use programming softwares for drones, fingerprint scanners, etc. Essentially, this makes the creation of products such as like these metal material products like drones, it makes them widely available and free for anyone to use and therefore develop their own products. This extends to agriculture in that open source allows for the sharing of data and plant life, allowing for replication of conditions to replicate extinct plant life, and that is explicitly for this company called OpenAG, but the concept applies to everywhere. It also projects methods for water conservation. Moving beyond that, open source can be applied to food. So the idea of open sourcing recipes and creations of edible arrangements is actually possible through certain websites, as you can see on the right. People are able to share foods that they like, how to make them, and sort of create a community for people who are looking for new foods to make or eat. Also, open sourcing for books. So this is kind of more of a conceptual idea, but essentially it allows for multiple people to write and read these books that can be shared publicly and for free, essentially. So more open sourcing. Obviously, a big one that people know is Wikipedia. So the whole idea of Wikipedia essentially is that it is an online encyclopedia in which anyone who nowadays has to be accredited, but essentially it allows anyone with knowledge on a certain topic to write these ideas and knowledge in a public forum in which everyone can learn from. This is obviously very beneficial for people looking to create mass amounts of information on a very specific topic. Another thing is IKEA delegating, I think that's how you say it. Essentially, it's open sourcing furniture. It's another conceptual idea, but essentially IKEA is bringing this idea that its furniture can be moved around, the parts can be shifted in certain ways as to allowing for people to set up their furniture any way they like. This not only goes for, say, couches and bedding and stuff, but also for lamps and other furnitures that people may want to adjust and not have be a very specific size. In terms of softwares, going back to softwares for open sourcing, one of the most notable and influential one is Linux. Linux was created in 1991 by Linus Torvalds, as you can see on the right. Essentially, it's a free operating system that has been applied to numerous companies and other software writers. That has now become huge. It is the leading operating system on servers and big iron systems. So that means that it is widely used on servers and mainframes, which serve to serve products attempting to connect to sources of information. Another thing about Linux is it is exclusively ran on the Chromebook, or the Chromebook exclusively use it, the Chromebook dominates the K2 education market, and makes up over 20% of sub $300 notebook sales. So the Chromebook is huge, and Linux is a main part of why it is so compatible with everything, and it's widely used. Linux is also can be used on embedded systems that are highly tailored to specific processes. So this may include routers, automation controls, television, digital video recorders, video game consoles, and smartwatches. Linux is compatible with all these things and essentially can be re-downloaded for free and used and repurposed for anything that you may want it to be. So just taking in the scope of Linux, some things on it that people don't really realize are that it's huge. It's essentially everywhere since its first creation in the 90s. One of the main things that people may know it for is Android. Android smartphones use Linux and run on Linux operating systems. It's also used heavily in film production. It was first used in 1997's film Titanic, and currently it is being used by DreamWorks Animation, Pixar, Weta Digital, and Industrial Light and Magic. So all these huge film producers are using Linux for film production. Also, it's used on desktop computers. So its estimated share of use on desktop computers is 2.1%, which, when you think about it, is actually a pretty huge number, considering Microsoft makes up over 80% of all desktop operating systems. But for this Linux program, which is essentially free, it's pretty huge that it by itself is run on over 2% of all the laptops and desktops in the world. It also is used heavily in web servers. A recent study in May of 2015 found that of the top 1 million web servers, in terms of people using servers, 96.55% of all those servers ran on Linux operating systems. Moving on to the Open Source Initiative. This is a non-for-profit whose mission is to raise awareness for open sourcing and open sourcing projects. It was created in February of 1998 by Bruce Porens and Eric Raymond. And they adopted the open source definition for specifically defining what is open sourcing software and how it can be applied moving forward. So some notable projects that involve open sourcing that I have found, you may have heard of some of these, but they're all very interesting to me. The first is GitHub, which is essentially an open sourcing community that shares softwares and coding projects. There's GNU Cache, which is essentially multi-entry bookkeeping. It handles multiple currencies, creates budgets, prints checks, and creates custom reports for businesses that wish to use it. More projects include MyCollab, which I think more people may have heard of. It is a community edition. This program, MyCollab, allows for a community edition that allows multiple people to create and use tools involved in customer relationship management, document management, and project management. Another one that was very interesting to me is Open APS. So this is a open sourcing project that is devoted to improving the lives of people with type 1 diabetes. This is done by including community reference implementation, a safety-focused reference design, and even a tool set that allows people to be able to build their own artificial pancreas device to be able to safely regulate their own blood glucose levels overnight by adjusting insulin levels. Moving on, we have OpenTunes, which is essentially a open sourcing 2D production software that allows people to share production tools that allow them to create animation features or whatever videos they wish to make. And the last one I like to talk about is RoundCube, which is an open sourcing browser-based email client that provides an alternative to Gmail. This features support for 70+ languages, integrated spelling checks, a drag-and-drop interface, a feature-rich address book, HTML email composition, multiple search features, PGP encryption support, threading, and much more. So in conclusion, open sourcing can be applied to many different areas, and a lot of things it can bring about are very interesting. So I told you what open sourcing is. We talked about the license, possible benefits, how it can be extended beyond software, Linux, the open source initiative, and I listed for you many projects. Thank you for listening to my project, and I will see you all later.